Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into something critical for a lot of folks working here in the U.S., the H-1B visa, and specifically, what happens when you approach that 6-year mark. We've gathered quite a range of sources, official USCIS documents, FAQs, plus insights from immigration law groups to try and give you the full picture.
Right.
Our goal today is pretty straightforward. Unpack the complexities around this 6-year limit and shed light on the different ways you might potentially extend your stay.
Exactly. And the H-1B itself, just as a quick refresher, it's that temporary visa for what they call specialty occupations.
Yeah, jobs needing a bachelor's degree or, equivalent experience, typically.
Right. Fields like tech, engineering, finance, lots of areas. It lets U.S. employers hire foreign talent. Usually it starts with 3 years.
And then potentially another 3-year extension.
Correct. Which brings us to that common 6-year maximum stay we hear about.
Okay, so 6 years is the standard. That comes from the law, right? The Immigration and Nationality Act.
Yeah, INA Section 214 G4, that's the basis for it. And after those 6 years, the general rule is, well, you need to leave the U.S. for at least a year before you could even think about getting a new H-1B.
But, and this is the key part, it seems like that's not always the end of the story. Our sources definitely point to exceptions.
Absolutely not always the end. One thing that often gets missed, and Berardi immigration law points this out, is recapturing time.
Recapturing time. Tell me more about that.
So, if you spent time physically outside the United States during your H-1B validity period, maybe for vacation, work trips, family visits, those days potentially don't count towards your 6 years in the U.S., so you might be able to add them back onto the end of your 6 years, extending your stay.
That makes sense. If you weren't here, you weren't using the time.
Precisely. But, and this is crucial, you need meticulous records, like really accurate tracking of every single trip, entry, exit date.
Right, because USCIS will want proof. Passport stamps, I-94s, flight confirmations, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Any small slip-up or missing documentation there could cause big problems, delays, even denial of the extension. It needs to be spot on.
Okay, so meticulous record keeping for travel is key for recapture. Good tip. Now, moving beyond just time outside the U.S., what about extending based on progress towards a green card? That seems like a major pathway.
Yes, that's probably the most common and frankly most significant route for extensions beyond 6 years, if your employer has started the green card sponsorship.
Like filing the PERM labor certification or the I-140 petition.
Correct. Once those steps are underway, it really opens up possibilities under a law called AC-21.
AC-21. Okay, the American Competitiveness of the 21st Century Act. Both the USCIS FAQs and Berardi mention this one. Sounds important.
It is. It was designed, to help U.S. companies keep skilled foreign workers, especially with long green card waits. And a couple of sections are absolutely vital here.
Right, let's break those down. Which section should we look at first?
Let's start with Section 106A and B. This is a big one. It says if your PERM application or your I-140 petition has been pending for 365 days or more.
So a full year.
A full year, yes. Then you can get H-1B extensions in 1-year increments.
1 year at a time. And this applies even if the I-140 isn't approved yet, or if your priority date isn't current.
Exactly. That's the key part of 106B. Just having the process pending for that year is enough to qualify for these 1-year extensions. It's a huge relief for many people caught in processing backlogs.
Okay, so that buys you time while the initial stages are churning through the system. What about the other AC-21 provision you mentioned, Section 104C, I think? Temple University site and USCIS talk about this one too. How is it different?
Right. Section 104C is a bit different. This applies when you've already got an approved I-140 petition, so you've cleared that hurdle.
Great. So you're approved for an employment-based green card like EB1, EB2, or EB3.
Yes, but, and here's the catch, you can't actually file your final green card application, the I-485 adjustment of status, simply because there isn't an immigrant visa number available for you yet.
The famous visa backlogs. Per country limits or just overall category limits kicking in?
Exactly. You check the visa bulletin and your priority date isn't current. Or maybe the whole category is listed as unavailable. You're basically stuck in line, even with an approved petition.
So what does 104C do for you then?
In that specific situation, AC-21 Section 104C allows you to get H-1B extensions for up to 3 years at a time.
3 years? That's much longer than the 1-year extensions under 106B.
Correct. It provides a longer runway because, well, these visa backlogs can sometimes stretch for many, many years, especially for individuals born in certain countries like India or China.
And USCIS guidance clarifies you can get these 3-year extensions multiple times if needed, right? It's not just a one-shot deal.
Yes, that's an important clarification they've made. As long as you still meet the criteria approved I-140, visa unavailable, you can keep applying for these extensions until you can finally file for your green card. It's a critical safety net.
A vital bridge, really, to maintain status during those long waits. Okay, so getting that I-140 approved is clearly a huge milestone. What does that process generally involve for an H-1B holder, according to, say, the Visa Nation resource?
Well, typically it starts with the employer proving they need the foreign worker, often through that per labor certification process with the Department of Labor.
Testing the U.S. labor market first.
Right, unless you qualify for a category that bypasses PERM, like certain advanced degree professionals or multinational managers. Then the employer files the I-140 immigrant petition for alien worker with USCIS.
And the requirements depend on the category, like EB2 needing an advanced degree or exceptional ability, and EB3 having different tracks.
Exactly. EB3, which is common, has subcategories like skilled workers needing at least 2 years experience versus maybe other workers needing less. These details matter for eligibility.
And once that I-140 is approved, does it offer any security? Even if, say, you change jobs later on. The USCIS FAQs seem to suggest it does.
It does, significantly so. A really important rule is that once an I-140 has been approved for 180 days or more, it generally won't be automatically revoked just because the sponsoring employer withdraws it, or if you leave that job.
Wow, okay. So the approval itself remains valid in a way.
Yes, and crucially, you get to keep the priority date associated with that approved I-140. That date is your place in the green card queue. You can usually use that same priority date for a future green card application filed by a new employer.
That's huge for flexibility. And you can still use that old approved I-140 as the basis for H-1B extensions beyond 6 years, even if you're working for someone else now.
Generally, yes, under the AC-21 provisions we just discussed, provided you meet the other criteria. That 180-day mark post-approval is key for this portability of the I-140 benefit.
Okay, that really empowers the worker quite a bit. Now, what about later in the process? You file the I-485 to adjust status. Can you travel internationally while that's pending? I know advanced parole is usually needed.
That's the standard rule, yes. Leaving the U.S. without advanced parole while your I-485 is pending is generally considered abandoning the application. But
There's an exception.
There is,
Yeah.
specifically for H-1B holders and also L-1 holders. As long as you maintain your H-1B status and you aren't in removal proceedings, you can typically travel internationally and re-enter using your valid H-1B visa stamp, even with an I-485 pending, without needing advanced parole.
That's a very convenient exception. Avoids needing another travel document. Good to know. Let's talk about changing jobs before the I-485 stage, just on the H-1B itself. How does portability work there?
H-1B portability is another great feature. The USCIS FAQs explain this well. Basically, if you have an existing H-1B, a new employer can file a petition for you. And the moment they properly file that new non-frivolous H-1B petition...
The moment it's filed, not approved.
Correct. The moment it's received by USCIS, you can actually start working for that new employer. You don't have to wait potentially months for the final approval notice.
Okay, that allows for much smoother job transitions.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, your green card progress, like that priority date from an old I-140, isn't necessarily lost when you change H-1B employers.
So lots of flexibility built in, it seems. But what if, hypothetically, someone's nearing their 6-year limit, and maybe the green card process hasn't started or isn't moving fast enough? Are there any other visa types they could switch to?
Yes, that's a consideration too. Berardi immigration law mentions a couple of common alternatives. If you qualify, you might look at the O1 visa for individuals with extraordinary ability.
Right. People at the top of their field, science, arts, business, athletics.
Exactly. Or if your company has international offices, the L1 visa for intracompany transferees could be an option, moving you from an overseas branch to the U.S. office.
So O1 or L1 might be fallback options if the H-1B extension routes aren't available yet. Good to keep in mind.
It's definitely worth exploring if you meet the quite specific criteria for those visas.
Now, despite all these potential extensions and options, it sounds like there are definitely pitfalls, things people really need to watch out for. What are some of the big warnings coming from our sources?
Well, the number one warning, echoed by Berardi and others, is simply waiting too long to start the green card process.
Because you might hit the 6-year limit before your PERM or I-140 has been pending for the required 365 days.
Precisely. If you cut it too close, you might find yourself ineligible for those crucial AC-21 extensions. Early planning with your employer is absolutely key.
Makes sense. What else?
We talked about tracking travel for recapture time. Inaccurate tracking is a big pitfall. Any discrepancies can cause major headaches. And really understanding the visa bulletin is critical, especially if you're relying on that 3-year extension under AC-21 Section 104C. You need to know if your priority date category is actually considered unavailable when you file for the extension. USCIS checks the bulletin in effect at the time of filing.
Okay, so staying updated on the monthly visa bulletin is non-negotiable in that scenario. What about losing your job? That's always a worry.
Yeah, job termination is stressful. The USCIS FAQs confirm there's generally a grace period, up to 60 days.
60 days to do what? Find a new job, change status, leave.
All of the above, potentially. Find a new employer to file a new H-1B, file to change to a different status like B2 tourist temporarily, or depart the U.S. to avoid accruing unlawful presence.
But you mentioned having an approved I-140 might help here.
Yes, in some situations, having that approved I-140, especially if it's been approved for 180 days, can provide additional options or pathways even beyond the 60-day grace period, potentially allowing you to find a new job that can utilize it. It adds a layer of security.
And it's worth remembering, too, that H-1B workers do have rights, protections against employer retaliation if they, say, report wage violations related to the labor condition application.
Absolutely. And USCIS does retain some discretion in truly extraordinary circumstances to grant extensions even if someone has technically fallen out of status for a short period, though you definitely don't want to rely on that.
No, definitely not. Okay, before we wrap up, let's just touch on that USCIS data for fiscal year 2023. It gives a bit of context to who's using the H-1B. Any surprising highlights there?
Well, maybe not surprising, but definitely stark the sheer dominance of computer-related occupations.
Oh.
About 65% of all approved petitions were in IT and computing fields.
Wow, nearly 2/3.
Yeah, and the median salary reported was around $118,000. The top industry sector was professional, scientific, and technical services, again, heavily tech-focused.
And country of birth, still primarily India and China.
Yes, those remain the top two by a significant margin. Another interesting point was that for people already in the U.S. who changed to H-1B status, the vast majority, 72%, were previously on F-1 student visas.
So that pipeline from U.S. universities into H-1B jobs is very strong.
Very strong, yes. And finally, most approved petitions, nearly 90%, had that standard 2 to 3 year validity period, aligning with the initial grant and first extension timeframe.
That data really paints a clear picture of the program's current usage. Okay, so let's try and boil this all down. As we wrap up, what are the absolute key takeaways for someone navigating this H-1B 6-year limit?
I think the main thing is, yes, the 6-year limit exists, it's real, but it's definitely not always a hard wall. There are established mechanisms to extend beyond it.
Particularly if you're on a green card path.
Exactly. Those AC-21 provisions tied to pending or approved PERM I-140s are crucial lifelines. And don't forget about potentially recapturing time spent abroad.
So know the rules, know the exceptions, and the other big message seems to be planning, right? Proactive planning.
Absolutely critical. You cannot wait until month 70 to start thinking about this. Talk to your employer early, understand the timelines for the green card process.
And probably talk to an expert, like an immigration attorney, for advice tailored to your specific situation.
Highly recommended. This stuff is complex, policies can shift, and personalized guidance is really invaluable. Staying informed about the nuances is just paramount.
Right. So for you listening, as you navigate your H-1B journey, it's clearly not just about the next deadline. Think longer term. How do these potential extensions fit into your career plans, your life goals here in the U.S.? And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Knowing these detailed rules about extensions and green card lengths, what new questions does this raise for you about your own long-term strategy for working and potentially living permanently in the United States? Something to definitely mull over.
Good thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.